Hello and welcome to You Don't Play Boxing, the influencer boxing podcast from Mirror Fighting. I'm Martin Dorman, joined in the same room, unbelievably, by Harry Davies and Donna Corby. We are back a week after we weren't sure if the KingPyn boxing tournament was going to go ahead. The fact that Harry and Donna are in Dublin in that same room means it is going ahead, which is in fact exactly what Donna told you 7 days ago. We are recording this on the Friday before the press conference, before the weigh-ins. So at the moment, the card has stayed together. Who knows what might happen later. We're going to have a look back at the week so far. We're going to look at the fight card itself, go through the fights, make some predictions. And then we will end the show with a look at the controversial fight between Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou, which we know is not an influencer boxing fight, but it's a crossover boxing fight, so we're definitely going to claim it. Guys, I'll start with you, Donna. You said, we talked last week about, the tournament maybe not happening, maybe collapsing. In the end, it was all just a big fuss about nothing, right?
It seems that way. And I actually spoke to the KingPyn owner yesterday, and I think perhaps he was retroactively messing around a little bit, but he goes, well, there was a bit of strategy to it. I'm not so sure about that, but I think that perhaps they did let the ball roll a bit more than they needed to. Like, they let people think it was off for a little longer than it actually was. But certainly speaking to other people on the inside, it was not a PR strategy, as we discussed last week. I think there was very much, it was in trouble, but we've got a card. You said the card is pretty much intact. They've actually added more fights. They've got these smaller Irish influencers on there. Ben Williams is on against Fabu D, and there's another couple of fights there. So yeah, we're looking at hopefully a good entertaining night of influencer boxing on Saturday night.
It's been a shortened fight. We had the workouts yesterday and then the combined press conference and weigh-in today, which is slightly unusual. The workouts are workouts, right? I think in professional boxing, I became bored of them about 5 years ago. They are, at best, a skipping session. At worst, some of the ones are dreadful. But did you glean anything from it? Was there anything interesting at all?
You know what? It's very unique, these ones, because there's such a vast array of skill sets and also sort of like equipment. One big thing takeaway was Whindersson Nunez turned up and sort of did a couple minutes and move around. But the main thing was almost like a promotion for these new gloves that he's got where they measure the power and stuff like that. And then previous to those open workouts, you've got people stepping in there that look like they've got a couple of weeks training the best, but that's the sort of beauty of the influencer boxing scene. Again, people like Jarvis, who's training at Mayweather's gym, has got solid fundamentals, and then you compare that to some of the other guys, and it's night and day. But the takeaways were, it's hard to really say what the takeaways were. It was, there were some long ones. A couple of guys did 2 minutes. Some of them did like 10 minutes. And I guess we do have to remember they're stepping in the ring tomorrow. So, and with their opponents in the gym as well, I guess they don't want to show off much. But there were some good displays all around. But yeah, what do you think, Donna?
Yeah, I thought the thing is, you were saying you're bored of open workouts in legitimate professional boxing. The thing is that because you're looking at people who are beginners, sub-novice level, you can actually tell this person does look a cut above, as opposed to their opponent. At pro boxing level, it's very different. It's very unlikely, even at the low level on the cards, you're going to see people who you watch them hit the pads and you're like, oh, this guy's way better than the other person. You know what I mean? But you do, particularly with the female fighters who started later than a lot of the men. You look at the men's bracket now. King Kenny's been boxing about 2 years. Whindersson Nunez about 4 or 5. Gib longer than that, and Jarvis another 2 or 3 years as well. Whereas with a lot of the women, Barbie's one of the more experienced ones. And I spoke to her yesterday. She said maybe 8 or 9 months she's been training, and obviously her workout went very well. But I think it is a little different in influencer boxing because people are beginners and you can pick up stuff. You can see the way people turn into their punches and all that stuff. You can see how some people very rigid, very stiff. So it is a little bit more of a useful exercise in this particular realm of the sport. But I can absolutely see why people get bored of them in real life boxing. And also, I think an open workout should be for the main people. I don't think I needed to see Ben Williams hitting the pads, or I don't think we really needed to see everyone in the losers bracket hitting the pads. We could have probably we didn't need it to be 4 hours long either. I think these things could be condensed a lot. But yeah, it was ultimately, like you ask for takeaways, and it's like, I suppose, like I suppose you could see like Emily Brooke looked a lot sharper, I thought, than Barbie. That's like the one that stands out. You look at even the higher level guys like Kean Cowley. You looked at him, and I hadn't really seen anything of his opponent, but it does. You could see like, oh, this is going to be a solid scrap. So yeah, there's more to take away from these things than there would be in a standard boxing card.
It's a good point, actually. I do want to make the point, and I hope everyone listening realizes this, that we do actually cover professional boxing, and I do professional MMA. And when we talk about influencer boxing, we're doing so knowing full well what it is and what it means and where it sits in the the hierarchy of combat sports. So although we are talking about things just as seriously as we would be talking about the professionals, we do it knowing exactly what we're watching. But that's a good point, actually, about being able to see progress, because you can't really, if you watch Tyson Fury workouts actually are not the worst ones, because he does actually normally go through quite a session. You're not going to see much you haven't seen before. But yeah, it's a good point, actually, to see the progression even from a few months, and especially if there are disparities in levels that you just talked about, Emily Brooke, then actually maybe that gives a bit of a hint and an insight into what's going to happen on Saturday night. Unless there's anything else from the workouts, I just want to get straight on to, let's assume everything goes fine this afternoon, this evening, the card stays intact, and we head into the tournament tomorrow night. I just want to get straight into running through the fights. We will start with Barbie, not her real name, I believe, against Emily Brooke, who is a younger Brooke sister, right? And obviously these two semi-finals could see the Brooke sisters fight in the final, which presumably everybody wants to see. Having seen her yesterday, do you see Donna Emily winning this fight, or is Barbie holding back?
I don't know that. I mean, people talk about that a lot. Like, is this person holding back? Like, I don't know if these people are good enough to hold back and make it noticeable. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think, no, I think that Emily does look the more, solid boxer. She looks like she has the more, natural skill set. But Barbie's got that power. She knocked Whitney down. Sorry, we dropped for a second. I was saying the Barbie has that power. She got the big knockdown. She's looking for the big highlight reel knockout, and it's probably one of the most enthralling. Like, it's probably the more enthralling of the two fights is Emily Brooke and Barbie. And I don't know which way it's going to go, because skill for skill, Emily should be better, but Barbie's got that power. She's got the size. Like, she was telling me, she dropped she'd be more comfortable around, I think, 170, 180, and she's like, which is pretty impressive.
Just to recap from the last round, Emily Brooke beat Amber O'Donnell on points, and Barbie beat Whitney Jones, as you said, Donna. Harry, if you can remember back to the first round, did you come away from those fights having an idea of who might progress on to the final?
Yeah, well, like Donna was saying there, I think Barbie was the standout because I believe she's the only one that scored the knockdown the whole night, and we'd not really seen anything from her before. I guess with Emily, we could maybe sort of base the fact that Elle's been there a couple of times. We're sort of getting at something similar with Emily. But I remember speaking to Emily before that event and sort of saying, when did this idea come around? And she's like, I've only been boxing for a few weeks. So going back to, again, her open workout, I feel like it will be a bit closer now, because when that fight happened in April, and now obviously we're 3 months on, I feel like Emily's made a lot of improvements. And looking back to when Barbie won, people will be like, oh, she's going to wipe the floor with Emily. But Emily looks, pretty sharp. And I feel like even though there's a probably big size and weight advantage for Barbie in that fight, the improvements that Emily has clearly made in the last 3 months, she's going to put on it's going to be a bit more competitive than I think most people are expecting. So a prediction for it, I still do think Barbie's going to progress to the final. Just the power she holds, I think it'll be too much for Emily, but I feel like Emily will be able to hold her own.
Yeah. Okay, so that could be one Brooke sister out in the first fight, or the first main card fight of the night. The second fight, we'll see Elle take on Julie Poca. They both won their fights again by unanimous decision in the first round. Feeling that Elle is more likely of the two sisters to progress?
Yeah, I would say, like, the issue that Elle has is she's got all this experience and she looks like a proper boxer on the pads, but we've seen her fight, 3 times now? 2 or 3 times? and we haven't seen the complete performance yet. Against Faith Ordway, they kind of swung for a bit, and she got the knockout very early on. But it was it was one of them fights where it was 40 seconds long, but it was one of them was going down. And otherwise, we haven't seen a great deal of that technique actually in the ring. So I think Elle Brooke has flattered to deceive up to now, and she's got a tough L task in her hand against Julie Pokey. She's very experienced. She's going to have a huge crowd probably on her side. There won't be many Brits in the 3 Arena. It'll be a lot of Irish for Kiefer Crosby and Cian Cowley, and then there'll be a lot of Brazilians, I would imagine, to watch Whindersson, and they tend to get they support their own, so they back Julie, and you wonder how that'll affect Elle. She's been out there more, but you would have to think in almost any of these fights you should favor Elle Brooke, but it's a hard she's flattered to deceive so far, so it makes for at least a discussion worthy of having, because on paper they shouldn't be fights worth talking about. She should be running through these girls, but it hasn't worked out that way.
And again, I think so. Elle Brooke's trained by Mark Tibbs, that's right.
Well, she is trained by him, but he's not in the corner because I think he's not allowed to corner non-British Boxing Board events or something.
That is a true story, because believe it or not, I had a white collar. Well, I've had a few white collar bouts, but my first one, I was trained by a former trainer or former boxer who had a training license but wasn't allowed to be in my corner on the night, which is exactly what I'm blaming for me losing the fight. But my point was really about Mark Tibbs is that, all right, I'm sure he's being paid for it. It's a job, but it does add a level of legitimacy to it, doesn't it?
100%, yeah. And you see a few people around. I see, a lot of legitimate people in the gym. I think Phil Sutcliffe was working with Ben Williams as well, who's a renowned coach. And like you say, you wonder, does that make an impression? If Tibbs is in her ear all the time, teaching her stuff, and then he's not in the corner on the night. I mean, you say it affected you in your fight. I mean, Harry had a fight there the other night, and he wasn't affected by not having a proper corner, but he got the 20-second knockout. But I think it probably does affect her. I would think that having that organization, and obviously Tibbs' gym has had a bit of a shake-up recently in terms of the women around, and so we'll see how it all plays into Elle. But when you analyze an Elle Brooke fight, on paper you should always say, she'll probably win this one.
I think with Tibbs as well, is someone sort of establishes him, he wouldn't be taking Elle under his wing if she wasn't serious about it. So I think that speaks highly of Elle, because clearly she's taking this thing seriously, and like Donna said, she's got a lot more experience than most of these girls, and obviously she's been with Tibbs for a while now, and she wouldn't just walk into the gym and train with the likes of Ebony Bridges if she wasn't completely serious about this thing. So obviously she's a front runner to win it, and Julie is, she's a big girl, and she's obviously got a tough task in front of her, but I feel like she's still the favorite to win this thing. Even if the first fight was a bit lackluster in her side in terms of against Miss Danielka.
We move on to the men. All 4 of the semi-finalists won their quarterfinals by stoppage, in contrast to the women. So hopefully the potential for more this weekend. We'll start with AnEsonGib against Jarvis. Probably the fight that, when all the rumours were starting about this not happening, was the one that would probably fall by the wayside, given its features arguably the most high profile of the two. Is this the one you're both looking forward to the most? Is it the one that has the potential to be the best fight?
Yeah, I think you look at Gibb, is he's been training so long. He physically, even though Jarvis is around the same height, Jarvis is so much physically smaller. You can see he's packed on a lot of size, and it's not as though Jarvis was battering Tom Zanetti, and Zanetti just had to quit. That was a weird finish there. It definitely, I think that was strange from Zanetti. A lot of people here in the house have been kind of analyzing that, and certainly Jarvis will need to look an awful lot better against Gibb if he wants to win. But that being said, I didn't think Gibb looked like a world beater against Austin McBroom either. Not that any YouTube boxers are, but he really he battered McBroom around in the first fight, and then the second time around he was getting hit by a few. It was a lot more tentative because obviously Austin wasn't willing to jump in and make those land those big shots like he did in the first fight, and he wasn't. He's a bit timid because he's after getting knocked down 5 times in the first one. But I thought, I think it's a similar situation where you should be backing Gibb based on the time he's had behind him, the fact that he's a much bigger guy. but it's certainly a really interesting, matchup. I mean, Jarvis's workout was incredible yesterday. He must have been in there for about 20 minutes, going through all the motions. He has like the Mayweather team around him, and yeah, he's certainly he's left no stone unturned. This FaZe Jarvis, or not FaZe Jarvis anymore. So there is definitely it is probably the more enthralling of the two semifinals. I don't know. Kilkenny and Whinderson's interesting too. They have got lucky with 4 good matchups now for the semis. Like there isn't really one of them where you go, I know this girl will batter whoever, or this lad will probably like easily handle them. So yeah, it is a fascinating matchup though, and it's very hard to pick a winner between the two of them.
I think with the Jarvis and Gib fight, the biggest takeaways we sort of had discussing this is obviously Jarvis is, fundamentally the sounder one, but he's sort of got a very bad habit of not moving his head. And someone like Gib, he's quite wild, swings overhands, and it's almost like that's tailor-made for Gib, because the fact that Jarvis isn't going to move his head, all really Gib needs to do is wing one of those wild shots, and it could be good night. So it's sort of a styles make fights thing, and I think that out of the other semi-finalists, this is sort of made for Gib. He's naturally like the bigger guy as well, so it's a tough one to call. But I do think Gib will get it done, but Jarvis is definitely no slouch.
Does the tournament need Gib to get it done?
I don't know about that. I think that the tournament needs Whindersson to get it done. I think they probably need one of El Brook. They probably need El Brook to get it done, but I think that Gib is... we saw KSI last night on Spaces. Gib's famous nickname is the 7-figure Gibber, and KSI said yesterday he's more like the 4-figure Gibber. So I think that Gib is obviously a big deal, and he has this like scarcity thing about him where he doesn't post so often, and then when he does post, people go nuts about it. But at the same time, I think that he maybe sees himself as like, Jake Paul, KSI, and then Gib, which is possibly not the position he's in. I mean, we haven't seen... He's a very good boxer. He might be the 3rd or 4th best YouTube boxer, but his drawing power has been tested a couple of times. We saw what Wembley looked like last time when he fought McBroom in the main event. There was no one there by the time Whindersson was done. We saw, the event in California at the football stadium. Interesting choice of venue. They probably should have gone for the car park of the football stadium and filled it up. And then, we saw in Florida as well. That was a decent little event, but Gib has yet to prove... I think I was saying this about Tommy Fury when he fought Jake Paul. Like, it's not to say that he isn't the draw, but he has yet to prove it, So the evidence right now is not that he's someone they need to get through. Although I do know that the promoters are very high on him. Like, they would love if he got through, but at the same time, him and Jarvis, they're both British. Final's going to be in the UK. I think they need Whindersson to win more than they need either of these lads.
And speaking about Whindersson, you mentioned that the scenes in Wembley last time with the Brazilian fans. I don't know much about the Brazilian population of Dublin, so you'll be able to tell me better. But there is a reason that fight, I assume, is top of the bill, because they don't want a mass exodus if there is going to be a large contingent before that last fight. He takes on Kilkenny. Harry, what are your... I'll come back to Don on the fan situation, but in terms of that fight, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, it's interesting you say with the sort of Brazilian population of Dublin, because I don't think people realise that the Brazilian population of London was so massive at the last one, because again, like Donna said, they all sort of cleared out after Winston's fight. But obviously that was the first time the UK crowd and sort of the European crowd in general got to see Whindersson, and I think they were really impressed. There was sort of high expectations for him because we know he'd sort of fought a Brazilian former world champ at, I believe it was last year, and he did, live up to the bill. He was looking like crisp, and this is a guy, like Donna said, he's been boxing for a couple of years, but now he's got a big step up in competition against Kilkenny, and it's a much harder fight for him than Filipek was. But the takeaways from obviously his open workout yesterday, he didn't really do much, but I feel like he didn't really want to show off because Kilkenny and Daly, his coach, was watching on from ringside. But yeah, I do agree with Donna. I feel like it's more of a case of that they need Whindersson to win than Gib, but it's a really hard one in this one because Kenny is someone who obviously takes it very seriously. Like Whindersson as well, he's been boxing for a couple of years. He's got a great jab. Him and Daly were very intense yesterday during their open workout. But the styles makes fights thing as well. This is a really tough one to call because stacking these sort of two guys up, I'd say Kenny's naturally quite the bigger guy, but maybe Whindersson's got the more crisper boxing, and it's a really difficult one to call. I don't really know. I'm sort of torn on this one. What do you think, Donna?
Yeah, look, I think. I mean, you mentioned Kenny's jab. I mean, have you seen his jab? Like he's got a great. That's kind of his big weapon. But yeah, I think Whindersson appears to. The problem that Kenny has is he's a great boxer. His brother Daly's a fantastic coach. You're going to see a lot of his pros doing well, going forward. But the issue that Kenny has is he's a very good boxer. He seems to have it all. He's a good looking chap. He's got everything going for him. The Beta Squad are huge. They're becoming as big as the Sidemen. But he's not a fighter. Like the problem he has is like he fought Ashley Tebby from Raksu in before his last fight against my mate Nate. And like he's a million times better than Ashley Tebby. Like there's every skill he's better at. He punches harder, his jab's better, he's bigger, he's crisper, but he couldn't get the job done because I don't know that he's necessarily that's the phrase like he's got that dog in him. He hasn't got that dog in him, like he's a really, really good boxer. So he should be too good of a boxer for Whindersson Nunes. But Whindersson is a fighter. Whindersson, he powered through that cut, in that exhibition. And he's been in, the tough rounds with really hard competitors. So, and of course he knows like the pressure's on him. And Whindersson's also like, he's very like lackadaisical. Like he's very relaxed. And he was telling me this week that if the fight got called off, he would have just gone and done a spar in SPG and broadcast it on his YouTube channel for free. Like he desperately wants to fight. And I think that that tends to give people the edge at this level where it's like, you can't be, levels and levels above skill wise. The levels are generally slightly different. I think that it makes for Whindersson being like favored in the fight. But that being said, like if Kenny can put it all together, he can be very confident of getting a result here.
Sounds like two intriguing fights at the top of the bill. Let me just run through very quickly the undercard. So the undercard is basically the losing quarterfinalists on the women's side of the draw, Amber O'Donnell against Whitney Johns. And in a commentator's nightmare, surely, Daniela Hemsley against Miss Danielka. Look forward to hearing that one. The two wildcard fights, you mentioned them earlier, packing in the Irish fighters, Kiefer Crosby against Aaron Chalmers, formerly of Geordie Shore, of course, and Cian Cowley against Conor Tierney. Just quickly before we move on, Donna, thoughts on how big the crowd will be tomorrow night?
Yeah, I think that like the tickets will probably like have been sold by the three: Whindersson, Cian Cowley, Kiefer Crosby. Unfortunately, Ben Williams appears to be like we saw him outside the open workouts yesterday. There was girls waiting for him outside. He's apparently a big deal in Dublin 15. But yeah, I think the Irish lads are big draws. I mean, Cowley's team, he's got Phil Sutcliffe in the corner. He's got Lee Hammond, I think, around him as well. And then himself, who's a Muay Thai coach. It's essentially Team McGregor from The Ultimate Fighter, which, maybe not the winningest team at the moment. But yeah, I think Kiefer's in a good fight. I've never seen a more one-sided gloves are off than Kiefer Crosby and Aaron Chalmers. Unbelievable. The verbal beatdown Kiefer put on him. But we were talking about this in the house, like with a couple of other journalists who are here, like, and it puts a lot of pressure on Kiefer because if he loses after putting all that talk on Chalmers, who is at the end of the day a reality TV star who came into MMA and admittedly in the face-off said, "Oh, I wasn't really a great MMA fighter," and now he's come into boxing with a couple of years' experience. If he beats Kiefer, then Kiefer is in trouble, and those UFC ambitions are in trouble. But I do think that Kiefer should be favored in that fight, and like a real verbal beatdown in the face-to-face. And then Cowley's a little quieter, and yeah, I think there will be excitement, and certainly you got to tune in early because these lads will bring the crowd with them for their fights.
Excellent. We will, of course, bring you all the results and analysis next week. But just to finish, as I mentioned earlier, Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou will indeed meet in a 10-round professional boxing fight on October 28th in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Fury's world title will not be on the line, but the fight will, I believe, count on their records. Of course, Fury's record being slightly longer than Ngannou's in boxing. I think what's interesting is the sort of reaction on both sides of the fence, if you like, MMA and boxing fans. I think boxing fans unanimous in their disgust, not too strong a word, with Tyson Fury for basically not fighting Alexander Usyk for one, and if he's not going to fight Alexander Usyk, not going to fight any sort of challenger, any sort of legitimate challenger to his title. MMA fans in awe almost of Francis Ngannou for leaving the UFC on his own terms as champion, signing with PFL, which is presumably a lucrative deal in itself, and then earning millions and millions from fighting Tyson Fury. I think I'm not going to speak for you both, but I'm sure you probably agree along those two lines. I think that's a fairly settled argument. So I don't want to go into too much about how this is dreadful for boxing. It is pretty bad for boxing. It's not what we want to see. And then there's the factor of Saudi Arabia just throwing money at fights, which mean that other fights can't happen. But let's just talk for 5 minutes about it as a spectacle. It will come 6 years after Mayweather-McGregor. What are your thoughts when it was actually announced? What were your thoughts?
Well, when this was announced, obviously, I think the biggest, disappointment, like you're saying, is not an actual contender for Fury, right? The big Usyk fight, which we all wanted to see, which is supposed to be on the same card as Joshua Wilder. But just going to the actual fight itself, I spoke with John Fury yesterday, and I said, look, is there actually any chance that Francis can sort of trouble Tyson? He said, well, when you take someone like Francis, who has the hardest punch ever recorded, there's always going to be a chance that he can win. And that was sort of the angle that people use for McGregor Mayweather. But you could even argue that Francis has a bigger chance to win than McGregor did in that fight just because of his power. And, they sort of say heavyweight boxing almost has its own rules. It just takes that one punch, where the lighter weight classes really isn't the thing. So, and what they've said, and again, the press releases for this, is they're really going to go for it. I think a lot of people think, are they just going to move around like some of these exhibitions are? They're sort of glorified spar matches, but they're like, no, we are really going to go for this, because they're two basically unified heavyweight champions of their respective combat sports. So I personally don't really see any way that Ngannou can get it done, unless for some Hail Mary reason he just lands that big punch. But I don't really see this going any other way than just a Fury beatdown. Stoppage, likely, maybe a couple rounds in if Francis will gas, because obviously he's a very big guy and those muscles don't hold up well in long fights. So I do see this going pretty easily for Fury, but I think it will be one that fans want to watch. Depending if there's any other events on the night. I know people sort of joked that the UFC are going to make the biggest card ever now for the same night, just to sort of rival it. But I see it being a spectacle, like you say. What are you doing?
Yeah, look, I think it's funny, like people who've never taken a punch before going, oh, it's a complete joke. Ngannou has no chance. Like, right, go on and take a right hand off Francis Ngannou and tell us that he has no chance of knocking anyone out. Like, it's not as if Tyson Fury, like they go like, oh, he's the greatest chin because he got up and all this stuff. He's been put down enough times. Like, Floyd was never put down. So this idea that Conor McGregor was going to be the guy that did it was pretty slim. Like, Francis is the heaviest puncher in the world. That's not to say that he has a chance in this fight, by the way. I'm just, making I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit. It's not like it's a completely ridiculous prospect that he could, like, Conor landed, this stat they use, like 111 punches, more than Pacquiao. But in terms of actual punches of significance, he landed about 3, 4, maybe 5. And you don't want to get hit by 4 or 5 right hands by Francis Ngannou. You know what I mean? So it is a farce. Tyson should be fighting Alexander Usyk. He should, at the very least, be fighting, like, the worst case scenario would be like an Andy Ruiz or something, especially after taking so long fighting Derek Chisora in December. So he did a joke fight in December. Now he's doing another one this October. Because we're not getting the Undisputed. I mean, we'll probably never get the Undisputed, but if we do get it, it won't be till sort of like, I know that February next year is what they have earmarked. Is he going to fight Ngannou in October, come back, do Christmas, and then fight in February? We'll see. I mean, it hasn't happened yet. So I think it's not quite the farce everyone's saying. Like, I spoke to Tyson's sparring partner yesterday, Thomas Carty, and he was saying it's a worse mismatch than Conor and Floyd. He was saying, he's going to be embarrassed, and it's good for the lads to get paid, but it's not good for boxing. I don't know about all that. Like, it is a cliche, but heavyweight boxing is these people are serious punchers, and Francis Ngannou is no more serious puncher than that. So yeah, he's it's a fantastic, if Tyson needed an interim fight, it's the biggest interim fight he could do. The UFC heavyweight champion, and I still call Francis Ngannou the UFC heavyweight champion, never lost the belt. He, the guy who won the vacant title beat someone who Francis had already, taken apart. And so I think it's UFC heavyweight champion, the best MMA fighter in the world at heavyweight versus the best boxer at heavyweight. And it is like, there is something to it. And also, you have to be delighted for Francis Ngannou getting that deal, his manager responded to our article yesterday saying that it's considerably more than $8 million that he's making. So Yeah, it's a massive deal. He got 600 grand for his last fight, and now up in the maybe the 8 figures now, but maybe into the tens of millions. Brings him into his PFL deal nicely, the number 2 promotion in the world. And we've got I think there's a lot more merit to it than people are making out. It's not a complete joke. It's not good for boxing, but it's not like the complete farce everyone's going on like it is.
Oh, there's no doubt that and I will be guilty of this as well, that as it approaches, everybody will be on board and everybody will watch it, because there is always that chance. I think the thing is, it's not just an MMA fighter against a boxer, it's an MMA fighter against, the most elusive heavyweight, the biggest in the world, and that's the problem with the style. I think there was a few days where Ngannou was going to fight Derek Chisora. Now that might be an absolutely dreadful fight in terms of watching it, but Derek Chisora's not going to bob and weave and get out of the way like Tyson Fury is, and going and sort of do 10 rounds just with his hands behind his back. So I think it's more about the style, but the idea that come October, when we have the first face-off, for example, whenever that is, and then they start, they come together and it gets to October, maybe there is a dearth of, other boxing in October. I don't know that at the moment there is anything, and nobody's going to go up against it. So that weekend, certainly, Halloween weekend it is, isn't it? Everybody will be behind it, and suddenly everybody will take interest because it's the only show in town, and there is always, however slim, that tiny chance that Ngannou does land. I mean, yeah. So we will be talking about it, I can assure you, over the next few months. But that is all for this week. We'll be back next week, as I said, to recap the KingPyn boxing tournament. And also Misfits is back next weekend, I believe, so we will take a look at that. That's all from me, all from Harry and Donna in Dublin. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.